Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're setting off on a really fascinating journey into the macroeconomic forces that have driven global commerce over the last few centuries. We're going to explore exactly why countries trade with one another and how our understanding of this massive global exchange has radically evolved over time. Whether you're already deeply familiar with global markets or you're just kind of curious about how the whole world economy fits together, this explainer is going to give you a powerful lens to view international business. As you'll see, these core theories still very much govern our world today. Okay, let's dive into this by asking a seemingly simple question. If one country gains from trade, does another country have to lose? This core historical debate didn't just cause arguments at dinner parties, it literally shaped the evolution of economic thought and international relations. For centuries, the answer to this exact question determined whether nations built trade routes or built warships. To understand how we arrived at today's incredibly complex global economy, we really need to look at this evolutionary timeline. We'll trace the path from the 17th century philosophy of mercantilism right up to Adam Smith's groundbreaking idea of absolute advantage in 1776. Then, we'll look at David Ricardo's brilliant comparative advantage in 1817, before finally arriving at the modern theory, formalized by Hexer and Olin in the 1930s. What's absolutely incredible to watch here is how each era of economic thinking cleverly solved the blind spots of the one right before it.
Part 1. The Origins of Global Trade.
So picture the 17th and 18th centuries. This was a time of huge development for modern nation-states. Back then, merchants, philosophers, and courtiers weren't writing for academic journals, they were writing for kings. Their primary goal was to enhance national power, and this collective philosophy became known as mercantilism. Now, mercantilists viewed trade strictly as a zero-sum game. Basically, if one nation wins, another inherently has to lose. They measured a country's wealth entirely by how much gold, silver, and bullion it could hoard. The logic was simple. A nation must heavily promote exports and actively discourage imports. By doing that, they'd run a favorable balance of payments, meaning more gold flows in than flows out. And, more gold meant a king could afford a much larger army and navy to go out and conquer new colonies. Now, while building armies with hoarded silver might sound like ancient history, the actual philosophy of mercantilism certainly isn't dead. Economic nationalism and state intervention in trade are still very much alive today. A prominent real-world application of this is what we call neo-mercantilism. For instance, the recent reciprocal tariff levies implemented by U.S. President Trump are widely viewed by economists as a revival of neo-mercantilist policies, focusing heavily on protecting domestic economic interests through trade barriers. Part 2. Adam Smith's Absolute Advantage. Fast forward to 1776, and that whole mercantilist view of the world was about to get seriously challenged. Adam Smith steps onto the scene and completely rejects the zero-sum myth. He argued that trade is actually a positive-sum game. His logic? If it wasn't mutually beneficial, nations simply wouldn't do it. To prove his theory of absolute advantage, let's imagine two nations, India and Pakistan, producing two goods, rice and wheat. In India, it takes only 2 hours of labor to produce a unit of rice, while Pakistan takes 3. So India clearly has the absolute advantage in rice. Conversely, Pakistan takes 3 hours to produce wheat, while India takes a sluggish 5 hours. Pakistan has the absolute advantage in wheat. Smith's solution to this? Stop trying to do everything. India should specialize in rice, Pakistan in wheat, and they should just trade. Both countries end up getting more goods for less total labor.
It makes perfect sense, right? But here is the fatal flaw in Adam Smith's theory. What happens to global trade if one country is just incredibly efficient and has an absolute advantage in producing absolutely everything? Would trade simply stop? This pivotal question sets up the next major plot twist in our economic history.
Part 3. Ricardo's Comparative Advantage. To solve this massive blind spot, David Ricardo introduced the law of comparative advantage in 1817. He mathematically proved that mutually beneficial trade works even if one nation is worse at producing everything. Let's change the numbers to prove his point. Notice that India now takes fewer hours to produce both rice and wheat. India has an absolute advantage in the whole shebang. But now, what's really interesting about this slide is the ratios. Look closely. India's laborers are 3 times as productive as Pakistan's in wheat, but they're only twice as productive in rice. India's comparative advantage is greatest in wheat. Therefore, India should dedicate its resources to wheat and let Pakistan specialize in rice, where Pakistan's absolute disadvantage is actually at its smallest. Both nations still end up richer through trade. It's brilliant.
Ricardo's theory is a real game changer and is widely considered one of the most important laws in economics. However, it does have some pretty distinct limitations. First off, it assumes labor is the only factor of production, totally ignoring crucial elements like land and capital. Second, it doesn't even try to explain why this labor productivity differs between nations in the first place. And perhaps most importantly, while it proves the nation as a whole benefits, it completely ignores the internal human impact. It misses the effect of trade on the distribution of income among the actual people living inside those countries.
Part 4. The Modern Trade Theory. To solve these remaining mysteries, Swedish economists Eli Heckscher and Bertil Ohlin developed the modern theory of trade in the 20th century. They actually later won a Nobel Prize for this work. Let's break down the elegant simplicity of their framework, which is often called the 2x2x2 model. They finally expanded macroeconomic theory beyond just looking at labor hours by introducing two nations, two commodities, let's say cloth and food, and crucially, two factors of production, labor and land. They also noted something very practical. Cloth is generally labor-intensive to produce, while food is land-intensive. So the crucial point is this. Under the modern theory, the basis of trade is dictated by what physical resources a country has in abundance. If the home country has a massive, cheap workforce, well, it's labor-endowed. It will naturally specialize in and export cloth. On the flip side, if the foreign country has vast, expansive fields, it is land-endowed. It will naturally export food. Countries export goods that intensely use their most abundant resources. This finally explains why comparative advantages exist in the first place. Part 5. Winners and Losers. But hey, what about that last limitation of Ricardo's theory? What about the actual human impact? Well, the modern theory shows us this fascinating internal chain reaction of international business. Step 1. Nations begin trading based on their abundant resources. Step 2. Because the home country is now exporting its cloth everywhere, the relative price of cloth rises domestically. Step 3. The owners of the abundant factor, so the laborers making the cloth, they see their wages rise and they gain purchasing power. But step 4 is the catch. The owners of the scarce factor, in this case landowners in the home country, actually see their real income and purchasing power fall. And this brilliantly illustrates the harsh reality of global commerce. The nation wins overall, for sure, but domestic scarce resources absolutely suffer. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly pressing question. We know from Smith and Ricardo that trade is a positive-sum game that grows a nation's total wealth. But we know from Heckscher and Ohlin that this wealth isn't distributed evenly. Trade creates distinct domestic winners and losers. So what do? How should modern economies protect those whose incomes are threatened by global markets without sacrificing the vast, overarching benefits of international trade? It's a question that connects centuries of economic theory directly to the headlines we read today. Keep this framework in mind next time you look at global markets. It kind of changes everything about how you understand the world.